Q&A first, and maybe that might lead to a topic you really want to hear about too. I don't know.
How do you find how do you see feral colonies up in the trees and all? What do you look for? That's one of the questions I have.
Well, I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but I'll try it on 2 or 3 other things. You know, you buy a white Ford van, and all of a sudden everywhere you look there's white Ford vans. Well, it's because you know what a white Ford van looks like now, and you never paid attention before. Well, finding feral bees is kind of that way. Once you've seen a feral colony, heard it, listened to it, then you kind of start picking up on things. So you'll be walking through the woods and you'll hear that sound that's distinctly honeybees, and you start walking towards that and you go, oh, there's some bees up there. Now there's other ways to find bees. I'm just saying, learning to key your ear for that, key your eye for, there's a lot of bees in the air up there and up in the tree. Bees move in a different way than some other insects, and pretty soon that kind of becomes obvious. Yeah. The other thing is, if you're just on the path of trying to find a feral colony, you don't know where there is any feral colony, I would start out by finding a water source. You go down and find a creek, you'll often see the bees coming and getting water. If you go down there and you mark one of those, all you got to do is take a little flour and sprinkle on it. You can tell that it's that bee. It'll fly off, time it when it flies, and it'll come back to the exact same spot and get some more water. And it'll fly off and it'll come back to the exact same spot and get some more water. And if you time that and watch the direction, now you kind of have a direction, and there's a formula you can use to calculate how far away they are. And I can tell you where to find that. It's on actually the Bee Source. There's an article in there on efficient hunting of feral colonies. It's by Adrian Winter, I believe. He has a formula in there that calculates the amount of time based on how fast they fly, how long it takes them to unload, how long it takes them to come back. It's not perfect, but it'll get you in the ballpark of how far away it is. Now, to me, those are the easiest ones to find because they always have to have a water source. You know, if there's any decent water source, what the bees are looking for in a water source is a place they can stand and they don't drown. They don't get, you know, caught in the waves. So they like the mud on the edge of a creek because they can land in the mud, suck it right out of the mud, not even get down there where the water is, and suck the water right out. And they have such a good filter in their tongue. You know, that proboscis is actually this like 3-part thing that goes together, but they can filter that so fine they can get all those little bits of dirt out. So they'll land. So if you know there's bees around and you go find a creek, there's probably some bees landing somewhere along the edge of that creek getting water on a hot day especially. So if you walk along the creek, if you don't see it here, just start walking along the creek slowly looking for them, and pretty soon you'll find some. Now that you found some, if you want to do some beelining, that's a whole other topic. I won't go into all the details, but you can start recruiting that one. You can put some syrup there, give it some syrup, and if it finds a nice, real rich source of syrup, it's thinking, well, I got to tell everybody else about this and get it to start recruiting and coming back and forth. And now you got quite a few bees coming back and forth to the spot, and then you can start catching them and using them like a beelining box is the best way to manipulate this because you can get several of them caught. You can get those several one at a time as you catch them in this one, move them into the middle one, and keep moving till the middle one's full. And now you can manipulate them to get one at a time to come out here and let them go and watch them which direction they fly. You can start trying to trace them back to where they came from. Now, if your eyesight's as bad as mine, you might have better luck if you actually catch them. You can catch a worker the same way you catch a queen. You just put your finger in the middle of their back and get on both sides. And as long as you've got them on both sides of the thorax, they'll be bending their abdomen around here and they can't reach you. And you can actually glue a little bit of down. I don't know what else to call it. Like down, you know, it's got lots of fluffy feathers on it to its back, and it kind of creates a bigger picture when you're trying to see the silhouette when they fly off, and it slows them down. So then you let them go, you can kind of get a better shot on where they're going. But anyway, that's a whole other topic. But as far as identifying them when you're walking through the woods, a lot of times you'll hear them, and you can, you know, key in on that sound and start walking towards it, and sometimes you'll find they could be anywhere from, I've seen colonies in a tree that were all the way at the bottom, and I've seen them where were way, way up at the top. There's no telling where they'll be. You can't count on that, but the sound and the bees in the air around the colony, there's always a lot of traffic around the colony, so you kind of learn to home in on that. Once I learn a plant really well, I'll be driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour and go, oh, that was one of those. Because I've gotten so good at all the things about what it looks like, you know, not just kind of what it looks like. But Somebody over here asked the history of VHS. Dr. Harbaugh was collecting feral survivors in Louisiana and trying to breed from them to come up with a varroa-resistant bee. And he called them SMR bees because they were suppressed mite reproduction. So all he knew, he didn't know what the mechanism was. He didn't know how they were surviving the mites. He just knew they were surviving the mites. And so he inbred them quite severely to try and fix those traits. And then started breeding queens from those. And Weaver used to sell them. I don't know who all else was selling them, but then eventually he was talking to Marla Spivak, and him and Marla Spivak finally concluded that, and I assume they did some experiments to prove this. I haven't read all those reports, so I can't say, but they decided it was some form of hygienic behavior. Somehow they were sensing that there was a mite in there, and they were opening the cell and getting the mite out. And so they called it varroa-sensitive hygiene, because how many of you know what hygienic behavior is in general? Okay. So basically, hygienic behavior in general is that the bees sense there's something wrong with this larva or this pupa, depending on at what point things failed, and they remove it. So even though it's capped, they remove it. And there's actually like two genetic things involved, but one of them is the sensing it and uncapping it, and the other one is cleaning it out. So is it Rosenthal or? Yeah, I think it's Rosenthal was doing research on this way back in the 30s to try and breed AFB-resistant bees. Yes, Dee?
That stuff you just talked about, with Spivak and the other one, it's funny that a year and a half, 2 years prior to that, I had published Chewing Out Varroa with ABJ, and they changed the name and did formal publications on it themselves. And won't acknowledge what I had already published with the journals.
That's correct. Before they ever published anything on that, Dee was talking about it, and we were having a lot of the treatment-free people were having conversations on observing chewing out of varroa before they went off on that. But yeah.
I've heard recently that they've discovered that it's the larva that gives off a pheromone that tells the bees on the outside that the mite is on the inside.
So the genetics may be that the larva signals them, or the genetics may be that they have a good enough sense of smell to smell the pheromone that the larva produces.
Or both.
Or both.
Or they actually have to respond to the pheromone.
Yeah, because both of those have to happen. So.
Yep.
So back to the hygienic behavior in general. You know, there's something wrong with the larva, they remove it. Varroa-sensitive hygiene is that they sense that there's a varroa in there, even if it hasn't done that much damage. And they remove it. There seems to be a different level or a different key that causes them to uncap it. I don't know. Which is why they came up with VSH as opposed to just hygienic.
So how widespread is that trait becoming in the breeder stock out there across the country? Is it 10%, 20%?
I have no idea. I don't even know if it's a good trait. But I have no idea. Yes.
I have some of those bees, and they don't build up very good. You
right.
have to get them to the next generation. If they open mate, that next generation is usually good. The first one is really slow to build up.
Well, they're probably removing perfectly good larvae because they're basically OCD. So I've heard of people who have VSH and or hygienic where they just removed the bees just removed all the larvae all of a sudden. Just cleaned out the whole hive. Removed all the brood and threw it out the door. And I don't think that was the right thing to be doing. But anyway, I think breeding for single traits is a bad idea anyway. I think it's been a bad idea every time people have done it. And people have done it with everything from horses and cats and dogs to bees. And it's always been a bad idea. It never turns out well. Because actually what causes bees to be resistant to varroa is probably some combination of a whole bunch of traits. And if all those traits are out there and this queen mated with different drones that had different traits, maybe this one likes to bite their legs and this one likes to chew on their you know, their whole body, and this one likes to senses that they're in there and removes them, and this one, you know, and then you've got a group, you've got a subfamily in this colony that has this trait, another subfamily that has this trait, and some of them that don't have any of those traits, they're just good producers and they make, you know, otherwise good bees. So that combination of all those things is probably what causes them actually to succeed. One of these traits may not ever be enough to solve it. And I'm all for the scientists trying to isolate these things if that's what they want to do, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem. I think that you're not really going to solve the problem until you start looking at the big picture. You got to stop looking at the mitochondria in the cells in the leaves on the trees and start looking at the forest. And you got to, because I don't think that the solution's there. People for literally millennia, for as long as there have been people, have been breeding animals, and the way they bred them was they just took the ones that had the traits they wanted and mated them. They didn't get all focused on one trait. Every once in a while somebody did, and it never turns out well. Like there's a particular, I don't even remember what the name of it is. There's a particular, I breed horses, but I don't breed quarter horses, but there's a particular, what do I want to call it, discipline in the quarter horse world, where they want this really muscular horse to show off how muscular they are. And this one particular stallion was just really muscular, so they started breeding him to all of the mares that had good traits they thought would work well in that discipline. And they did great, and that entire discipline was saturated with the genes from this one stallion. But it turns out he actually has a genetic anomaly, which is why he looks so muscular, is his muscles get locked up like he's got tetanus, and he happened to have it at a level where it didn't make him totally miserable, it just made him look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. But when they bred him to all these other horses that had always had kind of those traits, it ended up becoming a fixed trait where they would all end up dying as if they were dying from tetanus. Their muscles would just all be all tense. And now they can't breed this out because they saturated the whole gene pool with it. And that's because that one trait they wanted was that it would look muscular. They didn't breed for anything else. They just bred for that it would look muscular. Well, I think it's a bad idea. You know, you start breeding this dog to have this particular trait, and the next thing you know, the whole breed goes to pot. You really ought to be breeding for the things that matter, you know, in the long run, not in the and not things that are just superficial. Like breeding bees to be brighter yellow color is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what color they are. It matters whether or not they survive and whether they... Now maybe it does matter to somebody, but it doesn't matter to me. I want bees that survive and are gentle and productive. I don't care if they're bright yellow or if they're black or whatever color. I don't care. I just want bees that are healthy and productive and I can work with them. I don't want bees that are so mean they're no fun to work with. So I think breeding for single traits is a bad idea. I think we need to be looking at the big picture. But other questions before I get going here? Yeah.
How would you describe a hygienic hive when you look into it?
I'm not looking for a hygienic hive, so I'm not sure how to answer your question.
So the behavior is just the absence of... If you
want to measure hygienic behavior, what you do is you kill a small patch of brood. Now, I said before, there's two different mechanisms involved here. One of them is sensing that there's something wrong and uncapping it, and the second one is removing them and cleaning it all out. So you can test for the removing it by doing the pinprick one. You just go and pick a circle and you just poke them all so they've all been damaged, and you've already pierced the cap, and so they'll just remove them all. And now the question is, did they remove all of them, and how fast did they do that? If they do that with, like, in 24 hours, it's all cleaned out, then they're pretty hygienic. If it's 2 days later and there's just a few of them that have been taken out, they're not very hygienic. Now, that doesn't test for that first one, though, which is sensing underneath the cappings that there's something wrong. So the standard test is you get a 3-inch piece of PVC, you sharpen up the front edge of it a little bit so you can push it down into the comb, you dump some liquid nitrogen in there, and freeze the comb. Now, there's a few people, because they don't want to spend the money on a Duar, I bought one, what was it? I'm trying to think what I paid for it now. Probably $400 or $500, I don't know, for a Duar to put the liquid nitrogen, and then you got to go buy the liquid nitrogen. So your other choice, if you don't want to do all that, is to just cut that circle out, put it in the freezer, freeze it, and go back and put it back in the hole and see how long it takes them to take it out. But basically, you want to kill that brood in a way that doesn't damage the caps to see if they sense that it's wrong and clean it out really quickly. All bees will eventually figure out those are bad and remove them. You want the ones that do it quickly. The ones that do it in like 24 hours, they've cleaned them all out, right? So that's the way you measure hygienic behavior. there's really no other way. Just looking at a colony, you can't tell if they're hygienic or not. The only things that might give you a clue that they're hygienic could be so many other things that doesn't prove anything. So
if you look at the comb and it's clean and there aren't any damaged larvae in it, you know, and things seem to be going good, that doesn't really help you at all with that. What you want to know is what they clean up.
yeah, you want to know if they sense that it's damaged and they uncap it and they removed it. So, and the thing is, if you see an empty cell now and then, the bee's instinct is to leave some empty cells for a heater bee to go in and help keep the brood warm. That was their instinct until we bred against that for 200 years because we wanted perfect brood patterns. So there's some of those holes they just left because they left them. Some of those holes are because there was something wrong with that larva and they removed it. And so again, for 200 years we bred to these perfect brood patterns. We were probably breeding against the ones that were removing the damaged larva because, you know, we didn't care about hygienic behavior. Back to the hygienic behavior, the history of this whole thing was Rosenthal was trying to breed AFB-resistant bees. He was in the middle of that and was being pretty successful, and what he was measuring was hygienic behavior. That's what he was doing. So all of a sudden terramycin came out and got approved, and then nobody cared. So that was the end of that.
If those hygienic bees, there'll be no mites in the hive, and they'll be pulling out good brood.
Right.
And that's the crazy thing about them. They just keep pulling it out and cycling it back, pulling it out. There's like no mites.
And that, but that brings me back to I think they've now created a hyper version of hygienic behavior that probably isn't even good because they're breeding for that one trait instead of overall health and prosperity. So anyway, then Marla picked this thing up. Partly because of the varroa. She was hoping it would help with the varroa. I don't think there was ever any evidence it made much difference with varroa. But she was breeding for hygienic behavior in the hopes that was going to help with varroa. Maybe it helped some. Who knows? It didn't ever seem to tip the scale anyway. But she just picked up where Rosenthal left off. She just started doing the same tests and selecting for it. And she really wasn't trying to get into the bee breeding business. She was trying to get the bee breeders to take that over, and they never seemed to get that excited about it. A few of them started raising the stock she was doing it on, and so what you buy now is mostly descended from the stock that she was testing and sold to other breeders. I'm not sure where that's going to go in the long run. I guess we'll find out. Other questions? What would you like to hear about? My standard natural beekeeping one is 4 simple steps to healthier bees. I can do that one. I've got several on just common problems that beekeepers run into that especially if you're a new beekeeper you may not have thought of. Even if you're an experienced one you may or may not have seen those. Then there's what, you want to do that one? Just common issues? Okay.
Michael,
anybody
do you have
else?
any information on pesticides and bees?
I don't have any information, no. I don't have any data, no. I'm in the middle of a whole bunch of corn, and I can tell you my experiences with issues with pesticides, but that's about all I can do. Yeah.
What about the nutritional or characteristic aspects of getting pollen from GMO crops? Do you notice anything there?
Well, I'm in the middle of a whole bunch of GMO crops. I don't have any studies to prove anything about giving you my general feeling on the matter. I don't really care.
Do you feel like they thrive as much with that pollen as they do with common wildflower?
They seem to do fine.
Some of the studies on that pollen suggest that nutritionally, in many cases, is not as good for the bees in terms of amino acid content, etc. But anytime you have bees consuming vast quantities of one type of pollen and very little of anything else, you have a problem. And it's not necessarily because that pollen's bad, it's because you're not getting a full array of amino acids, or you're not getting all of the pieces of the nutritional puzzle that the bees really need for optimal health. So the agricultural problem isn't just about the pollen from GMO crops. It's about the lack of good pollen from all the other things that they've displaced.
Yeah. So I'm in an agricultural area that's had GMO for about 20 years. The bees are very healthy there. They're doing really well. But any bee in that valley can fly. If you fly more than a mile, he's out of the agricultural belt. And those crops are only there for a certain time of the year. They're obviously eating other things besides that.
So here's my experience so far, because I was there before they brought the GMO stuff and after they brought the GMO stuff. So let's just talk, let's pick a crop at a time here. Soybeans used to make me honey. Not a lot of honey most years, but some years it'd actually make me a huge bumper crop of honey. Now I haven't gotten any soybean honey since the Roundup Ready soybeans came out. Now I don't think that's because they're GMO. I think that's because they purposely selected it to make less nectar. They tell me it's because the nectar, they're concerned that the nectar attracts certain insects that might be a pest. And so they bred it purposely to not make nectar. So that really hurt my beekeeping a lot, because they used to grow a lot of soybeans around me. The other thing that hurt me is now they don't hardly grow any soybeans. They grow little, but you know, it used to be like pretty evenly split between soybeans, corn, and alfalfa. And now there's very little alfalfa and very little soybeans and lots of corn. They still will rotate the soybeans in every couple of years or so, but they're growing two or three times as much corn as they are soybeans, and the soybeans aren't producing anything. So that's hurt me. The GMO, you need to look at it a piece at a time. What have they spliced in, and what are they trying to accomplish, and how does it affect the bees? So they spliced the BT gene in. So let's talk about that for a minute. BT is Bacillus thuringiensis, or however you pronounce it. I doubt I'm right. That part of this, I can't remember how it's spelled, and the other part of it is I took Latin in school, and they never pronounce it the way the scientists always want to pronounce it, so I don't know. But anyway, it's a bacteria. It's a very common bacteria. You probably get exposed to it just in the normal course of your life on a regular basis. But here's what this bacteria does. It gets in your gut, it hits the acid in your gut, and it dies. And that's the end of it for you if you get exposed to the bacteria. You can spray it on, it's been used to handle wax moths for years. You can spray it on comb. It used to be approved for that. It's whoever was, I shouldn't say whoever, the Sertan was the name of the product, and they just didn't bother to renew it because the people who really cared about it were just growing their own, and then they wouldn't bother to buy it, or they'd buy something that was produced on a bigger scale for a different pest, but basically for moths, but just not a wax moth, and it was cheaper because they could buy it in bulk and there was more of it being sold, so they just never bothered to renew it anyway. So you can spray it on combs. It doesn't seem to do the bees any harm. The bees ingest it, and again, the gut of the bee is pretty acidic, and because honey tends to run around 4.1 at least, all the way up to 3.2 maybe, but 4.5 is pretty typical with bees, and that's fairly acidic. It's not stomach acid acidic, but it's fairly acidic. So if a bee eats BT, it doesn't seem to do them any harm. Where if a moth eats BT, because their gut is more alkali, it starts to reproduce, and it produces a toxin, and the toxin that it produces kills the moth. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So what they did was they took the gene in the bacteria that produces the toxin, and they basically just shot it random at the seeds and got some of them to take root, and they started producing seeds that would produce this toxin. This isn't like the bacteria. The bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a spore-forming bacteria. So if you eat the spores, well, if a wax moth or whatever kind of moth eats the spores, it starts to reproduce in the stomach, and the spores come to life, start to reproduce, and start producing the toxin. If you eat them, like I said, you don't get any toxin because it just dies before it ever produces any toxin. So now we've spliced this into our food supply. So all of our food, they splice this into potatoes, soybeans, corn, whatever. I'm not sure what all, those are the ones I know of. They probably splice it into more things. And this gene in the corn is constantly producing this toxin. So you're now eating the corn that has the toxin in it, which human beings have never really been exposed to in any large amount before, because we would just eat some of the bacteria would just die. This is the toxin. as if it was living in our gut and producing the toxin, which has never really occurred before. So I don't think we have any clue what the long-term effects of human beings eating the amount of BT toxin that we're now eating is, but we're now eating a lot of it, and we will find out in a few years what the effects are. I'm not sure what they are, but I don't think they're having that big of an effect on the bees. It doesn't seem to be hurting them from my observation. I'm in the middle of a bunch of GMO crops, and I don't think that's killing them. Yes. Some
of the farmers, what they'll do is they'll have a GMO crop, but they'll also blast something like Warrior right you know, like they have in Florida with the mangroves. They'll just spray it up into the air to coat everything with Warrior. And that's when it gets the bees. That's
what's Warrior?
Warrior is a pesticide.
Erythroid.
For corn.
So right now we're just talking about GMO crops. Let's stick with that for a minute. Okay, so the other thing we've spliced into almost everything now is the Roundup Ready gene. And basically it's just a gene that changes the way that the plant absorbs nutrients. And so the Roundup doesn't affect them because of the way they absorb nutrients. It doesn't get absorbed into the plant and it doesn't kill them. So they can spray Roundup to kill all the weeds in the field. Now, do I think that gene is hurting the bees any? Probably not. Not that I can tell. Again, I've got bees in an area like that. That doesn't seem to be hurting them. But it does affect the bees indirectly, hugely, because there used to be weeds growing out in those fields, and the bees used to be using them for food, and they're not there anymore. The weeds are gone. They spray it, they kill every weed in the field, and then they spray the ditches with 2,4-D and kill every weed in the ditches, and all that's left is the grass. So I've got grass in the ditches, which produces nothing for the bees, and I've got no weeds in the fields. I've got soybean that doesn't produce nectar anymore, and I've got corn which produces a very substandard pollen that the bees usually don't bother to collect unless there's nothing else available. So it's having a major impact because of all that. Now, back to the effect on us. I'm not, we're eating this BT toxin at unprecedented levels in the history of humankind. I don't know what the effects of that are going to be in the long term. Hard to say. The Roundup, I'm not so afraid of the Roundup Ready gene that they put in there as I am that they're spraying Roundup on everything and it's getting in our water supply and it's getting in to all these other things. But so indirectly, I think it's probably a really bad idea. As far as how it's affecting the bees, I'm not seeing that big of an impact. But yes.
They had it in the paper recently about the black lung stuff going on with humans where they sprayed, what was it, like a fluoride or a mixture or something over in the Far East. If they're doing that, but yet they use like chloride or fluoride in our water for making it supposedly better for drinking for humans, is that making a lot of the humans, and we don't know it, what's giving them their lung problems?
No clue.
And wouldn't it give lung problems to bees if you feed them water that's chlorinated?
I think it's a different chemical though, because it's more on the bleach side than water. And then in the pesticides, it's more organic.
So it's a hydrocarbon.
Yeah, so it's got a different structure. It's got a different balance.
It's not the same thing.
It's a different chemical.
But it's the same thing.
It's the same family, but it's different chemical.
Well, is anybody researching to make sure?
I don't think the money out, but there's the money to do it. I don't think there's nothing.
Well, let's talk about some common issues.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Thank you.
I'll just point this out since I've got this picture up here, and since one of your common issues is that they're building a bunch of queen cells, now you're trying to decide what to do. You see these queen cells? These are all queen cells, right? Now, what do you notice about those?
They're white.
They're different ages. This one's capped. This one's capped. This one's only just a cup, and it's got a larva in it, and they're feeding it, but it doesn't even have the whole cell built yet. This one's just a cup, pretty much. It's a little more than that one, but it's still, they're feeding a larva in here, but it's not fully drawn yet. This one's almost fully drawn and almost ready to be capped, but it's not capped yet. And this one over here, I can't tell because there's a bee in my way, but I think this one's capped also. Now, what do you think that indicates? What are these cells? Are these supersedure cells? Emergency cells? Swarm cells?
Swarm?
And why do you think they're swarm cells?
Emergency cells.
Aren't swarm cells all on the bottom? Isn't that what they keep telling you? And the emergency cells are all up in the middle? Now these are all swarm cells. You know why I know they're swarm cells? Because they're all different ages. Swarm cells are all different ages. They're not all the same age. Emergency cells are all the same age within plus or minus 24 hours. And supersedure cells are pretty much all the same age within plus or minus 24 hours. Swarm cells are all different ages. And these are all different ages. Also, I know it's a swarm cell because the crowd was, it's one of those colonies that was just suddenly booming and I'm pretty, they're not superseding when they're suddenly booming. That's a good queen, that's not a failing queen. So anyway, thought I'd put that. Well, I've got that picture up there. Before you get too carried away taking notes, all of my presentations are online. You can go to this particular URL or just go to Bush Farms, go to the beekeeping, go down the left-hand side till you see presentations. It'll take you to a page that has all these presentations. So don't get too carried away taking notes. Yeah.
On that PS5, are there supersedures? I hear all those different terms and I don't know the difference.
Okay, well let's talk about why bees raise queens. In a normal colony where nothing else is going on, and they're just gathering nectar and a flow's going on, they're not raising queens, right? So what triggers them to raise queens? I'd say one of four things. Most people say three, but let's say, I'm gonna say one of four things. The first one is they just plain get crowded. They run out of room and they decide to swarm. So the solution to that was you should have thrown some supers on. Now that they're building swarm cells, the solution is you're probably going to have to do a split because you're already too late. But odds are, if you're in the middle of a flow, you could have just thrown some supers on, they probably wouldn't have swarmed. The second kind of swarm cells, in my definition anyway, would be reproductive swarm cells. They didn't just get crowded, it's that time of year. Everything about the world around them is triggering them to want to reproduce. And so just putting on supers won't stop them. You're going to have to open up the brood nest or do some other manipulation that keeps the brood nest from getting clogged up. And there's the newly emerging bees employed so that they won't swarm. So that's another reason they build swarm cells. Now, supersedure cells are because the queen's failing. Her pheromones aren't up to snuff. Basically, a queen can't lie about her fertility. Her pheromones give it away. So they can tell, based on her pheromones, whether she's still fertile or not, or how fertile she is. And if her pheromones start dropping off, they go, whoa, she's failing, we got to replace her. And they start raising a new queen. Now, they may do that fairly seamlessly. They may just start raising a new queen, the old queen's still running around laying a little bit, and this new queen eventually emerges, gets mated, comes back, starts laying, and now we have two queens running around in the colony. And eventually, they just stop taking care of this other one, is what I would say from my observation, but I don't know. She ends up dead, eventually. It might not be till that fall, so they might both be laying clear till fall, but usually by next spring anyway, I don't have two queens in there anymore. So that's a supersedure. That would be a seamless supersedure. Sometimes the supersedure is, they don't like this queen, they start a queen cell and they dispatch her before the new queen's even out, which sometimes doesn't end well, because then if this queen goes out to mate and doesn't make it back, then they're queenless, hopelessly queenless. So, emergency is anytime there's no queen in here, which is not, therefore there's no queen pheromones, then they will start raising a queen. It takes them about 2 hours to figure out they don't have a queen, and in 24 hours they will have started feeding some of these more royal jelly and start thinking about turning them into queen cells. And in 48 hours, they're obvious queen cells in there. I mean, they've torn it down and reworked it so it looks like a queen cell. So that's an emergency cell. Now, the general rule people like to quote is that if they're on the bottom, they're swarm cells. If they're up in the middle, they're emergency cells. But that's only a very general rule. I would not count on that to determine what they're doing. Now, the reason it's important, and the reason we give them these names, is as far as this queen's concerned, it's just a cell. If she emerges, she's just a queen. But why the bees build these cells is what we want to know as a beekeeper in order to have the right response to these cells. Because if this queen was failing, and these are supersedure cells, doing a split probably isn't the best thing, because they were probably starting to dwindle down. The queen was starting to fail. They probably don't have as much brood as they ought to have. And I split them now. I made 2 weak splits that may not do all that well. I would be better off, if I know they're supersedure cells, just to leave them alone and let them raise a new queen and get back on their feet before I go splitting them. On the other hand, if these are swarm cells, they're about to start a new colony, I may as well help them start a new colony, so it ends up in my box and not in the trees. So when I see cells, I want to decide why they're there, so I can, as a beekeeper, make my best judgment as to what the right management is here. So if I think they're swarm cells, I'm going to split them. At minimum, I'll split them in two, and maximum, I might try to leverage more of these cells and set up smaller nukes with a lot of, and take advantage of more of those cells. But one way or another, I'm going to split them, because otherwise, in my experience, it is an awful lot of wasted effort to try to keep them from swarming once they're building swarm cells. It just isn't worth the effort. Can it be done? I think I've succeeded maybe once ever keeping them from swarming once they started building cells, but it wasn't worth the effort because you got to go back and keep tearing down swarm cells. You can't just tear them down once. You got to go back and go back and go back, and you're going through the whole hive. And it's usually a fairly strong booming hive where they wouldn't be trying to swarm. So you got a lot to go through.
So that's
it's just too much work.
The swarm cell is not what type of cell it is, it's the reason that they're doing it?
Yes.
Okay.
I pointed out that these are different ages because, again, I can't necessarily credit the bees with being smart enough to plan it this way, but their instincts are such that this one will probably emerge, this one, and this one will emerge earlier than this one, and this one. Probably they'll emerge, like this one, and this one over a course of 6 or 7 days. So what that allows them to do is the old queen leaves with the first swarm, and then if they think they want to do another swarm, because they often do an after swarm and an after swarm and an after swarm, or sometimes they only swarm once. Well, now they have that option because this queen, after that one left, this queen emerges and they guard these cells and won't let her kill them. Unlike if this was an emergency situation, as soon as she emerged, she'll just go sting all these other cells and they will let her. But if it's a swarm situation, they won't let her. They will guard these cells and keep her away from them. And then she may leave with an after swarm, and then this one might emerge. And then she may leave with an after swarm, and then this one might emerge. And so on until they decide they're done. Yeah.
Not only that, but they will confine a queen in a cell who's trying to hatch and then feed her so that she stays in there and she's fine.
If this one and this one were trying to, if this one had just emerged and this one's trying to emerge and this one hasn't left yet, they will she'll chew her way, like a tin can around there, unless you have like this tin can lid. They will propolize that all shut except for one little hole where they can feed her, and they won't let her out. And they'll just keep feeding her and they'll keep gluing it shut with the propolis and they won't let her out. And they'll keep her there until this one leaves, and then they'll let her out. Or in the confusion of this one leaving, the problem is when they swarm, it's almost like a riot. So sometimes this one will escape because of the riot, and sometimes you end up then with this after swarm that's got 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 virgin queens because these other ones escaped during the swarm and the chaos. Yeah?
Can you explain the difference between queen cells all the same age for what they're doing versus different size queen cells?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Have you heard or read anything about, those swarm cells I saw in the Man Lake catalog where they put it on the front of the hive to catch the swarm when it comes out?
I've had them before. They're not very effective for a number of reasons, but they're not entirely ineffective, but they're not very effective. First of all, as soon as you put something that's queen excluder material between the bees and the exit, you've locked all the drones in, and they'll just clog that all up with drones.
Yeah.
So all the ones I've seen for sale in recent years are nothing but a queen excluder on a little thing that fits on the front, right? And then it just gets clogged up with dead drones in a very short time.
It looks like a little box that fits on the front of it.
Yes, it is. It's a little box that goes on the front and it has queen excluder material on it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the bees leaving have to go through the queen excluder material. But the drones don't fit, and they need to leave every afternoon to go fly out to a DCA, and they will die trying to fly out to that DCA, and they just get stuck. They get stuck in that queen excluder material. So in a very short amount of time, it's totally plugged up, and none of the bees can get out. That's what happens. Now, they used to make a fancier one back in the day, but I haven't seen one like that on the market in 50 years. But they used to make one that was like that, except it had another chamber at the top where the drones could get up here. If they couldn't get out here, they would go up here trying to get out, and then they get trapped up here. I don't remember exactly how it was rigged, but it was rigged basically so that the workers could get in and out going through the queen excluder material. The drones would hit the queen excluder material, they couldn't get out, so they'd go up to this upper chamber and they get trapped up here. And that way they wouldn't clog up the entrance. And that works better, but you end up with a whole bunch of dead drones up here that your colony is going to have to replace because they've got an urge to have a certain number of drones, and those drones are dying, so they'll raise more drones, and kind of a waste of resources really. But that might actually not get clogged up with dead drones, which would help. But the other thing is, if the queen is really determined to get through queen excluder material, sometimes she'll manage to do it. And if she's trying to swarm, she may be pretty motivated to try to get through it, so she may succeed anyway. I have also seen queens stuck in a queen excluder because she was so determined to get through it, but then she didn't get all the way through because she couldn't. Now, probably, I'm just speculating now, probably the one that got stuck was a young queen, because when they first emerge, they're really pretty soft. Once their thorax is hardened, it doesn't change size from the time they emerge. It just is softer when they first emerge, and once it's hardened, I don't think she can get through. But when it's still kind of semi-soft, she might, if she's determined, force her way into that. I'm guessing that one forced her way to where that slight flexibility of her thorax got her in there, but she couldn't quite get all the way through, and then she was stuck and couldn't get back out. So I don't think they're very effective, but yeah, you can buy them. But, they used to call them an entrance guard. That's what they called them when I bought them. I don't know what they're calling them now. I haven't kept up. Most of the suppliers don't even seem to bother to stock them because they really aren't a very useful thing. They were really invented by Halley, and he invented them for the purpose of filtering out all the drones he didn't want his bees to be mating with. So he put them, the ones with the little drone trap thing at the top, like I described as the older ones were, he put those on so that the drones would go up into that trap, and then he'd just kill all the drones from all the hives that were genetics he didn't want. And that way he was eliminating drones from the hives that had genetics he didn't want. In my opinion, if you're a serious queen breeder and you're trying to shift your genetics of your drones, steal the drone combs out of the hives whose genetics you like, give them to the hives of the genetics you don't like, and it will suppress them raising more drones, because then they'll have enough drones, even though they're not their drones, they don't know the difference. They'll suppress them raising more drones because they have enough drones, and then you'll have all your other hives raising the drones from the colonies you wanted the genetics from. As soon as they've laid it up, you can move them into these other hives, and you've met their need for having more drones. And now this hive that you wanted more drones from is laying more of them because they still haven't hit their threshold of the drones they want. So that's a better way to saturate for drones than most methods. Most methods are you're just going to give them lots of drone comb, but according to Collison's work on drone comb and the amount of drones they'll raise, is they're going to raise the same number of drones no matter what you do. They'll just figure out a way to do it. They'll make cells here and there, they'll use them more often, whatever, but they will raise, they have a threshold of drones they're trying to reach, and they will keep working at it till they get there. So if you keep giving those other colonies, then this hive will keep raising more drones that you can keep giving to the other colonies, and then you get more of the genetics you want. But that's what that's probably good for. That's what it was invented for. It was invented for that purpose. Okay, I'll get through the preliminaries here. I like to call this my Tom Sawyer bee camp. You get to come to my house, do all my work for me, and pay me $100 a day. That's basically what it amounts to. So, if that appeals to you, you can go read about it there.
Can you share your business model on that?
My business model? It's Tom Sawyer's business model. It's not mine. Also, I'll say a word or two about the books back here, which if you feel cheated, you can let me know. But my big thick book back there is all on my website. You can read it all for free, or you can buy the book. It's entirely up to you. Dee's book is all available on BeeSwords. You can go there and read it for free. But if you want a really nice cloth-bound book to set on your shelf, it's back there in the form of a book. I love books, but yes.
The only thing about my book is the one like Beverly Bees has is about 150 or 60 pages because it's the original, just the short generalization, and yet all the files that are in there with the research papers and that's under point of view Lusby, which is a completely different thing, and she didn't put both pieces together.
Okay.
But still, when she says the book, the way back to biological beekeeping, there's a difference between something that's 150, 60 pages long and one that's 555.
That's actually 656, I think, but anyway. So I just want you to know, I don't want you to find out it's on B-Source and you could have read it for free and now you feel cheated, so. Anyway. So let's just pick the big picture here. What do you do if you're a new beekeeper and something has just freaked you out? I'm going to say there's two things you need to do something about immediately, and everything else can wait until you talk to your mentor or your other fellow beekeepers and get an idea of what is the best thing to do. If they're being robbed, you need to stop it immediately because they're not going to survive very long if you don't. In fact, there's a good chance they're not going to survive no matter what you do, but if you don't intervene immediately, it won't be very long and the queen will be dead and lots more bees will be dead and everything will be ripped up and all their stores will be gone and then it's too late to save them. So if they're being robbed, you need to do something right this minute. The simplest thing to do if they're being robbed that you can do right this minute is if you got even a piece of door screen, you just staple it everywhere that bees are getting in, staple it over that and totally shut the hive down. You can't do this for very long, but you can do it now, and now the robbers can't get in and you can decide what you're going to do next. Because you can't leave them like that for very long, especially in the hot heat of the summer because they can't haul water, they can't cool the hive, and then things will go downhill rapidly. Another thing that's popular is to get a sheet and get it wet and put it over the hive. That has the advantage of cooling the hive somewhat while at the same time blocking the entrance for the robbers. The other thing you need to do something about immediately is if this hive just swarmed and there's this cluster of bees hanging in the tree here and you hope to get it in your hive, you need to do that right away because they may not be there very long. You need to do something now. Everything else will probably keep until tomorrow. So one of the typical things I hear is this new beekeeper is on B-Source and they just posted, I opened up my hive, there were a bunch of queen cells and I destroyed them all so they wouldn't swarm and now what do I do? And then after 40 people have told them buy a queen, they start to realize maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. Because if you, just on that topic, I'll hit it a little more in a minute, but if you open up a hive and there's a bunch of swarm cells and some of them are capped, they probably swarmed yesterday. You just don't know it. So quite often it isn't that noticeable how many bees left. Sometimes it is. The bees can't count, okay? Well, they can count to 4. I think somebody did some research that a bee can count to 4, but a bee can't count past 4. So anything past 4 is just a lot, okay, to a bee. So when they swarm, a lot of bees leave. How many is that? Is it exactly half? No, it's just a lot of bees. A whole bunch of them, pretty much almost every bee in the colony goes rushing out the door. And then they go swirling around in this tornado and they start settling on the tree and about half of them end up going back in the hive. I say about half because they can't, like I said, they can't count. So maybe a fourth of them go back in the hive. Maybe 3/4 of them go back in the hive. You don't know. But if they've got a capped queen cell, usually as soon as that queen cell's capped, the next nice morning, calm, sunny, warm, they're going to swarm. So odds are if you found a capped queen cell, it was probably capped a couple of days ago. She probably swarmed yesterday and now you're destroying all the queen cells. That's not going to be good. So, so most of these things will keep. Go post something on a bee forum. Don't take it what everybody says necessarily. Pay attention to who seems to know what they're actually talking about. But talk to your beekeeping mentor, talk to somebody from your bee club, whatever, before you do anything drastic. I love Richard Taylor. He just says things so well. I'm assuming you all read that by now. I won't read it. This is one of the things that freaks people out. They get in their hive, there's no brood and there's no eggs, and they assume they have no queen. I get this all the time. Partly because I sell some queens, and so I get this, I need a queen ASAP. And well, what are your symptoms? Well, there's no break, and there's no eggs, and there's no brood. Well, they might have swarmed. They might have raised a new queen already, and she may be just about to start laying, and you just haven't given them enough time for her to start to lay. Because from the time, if you killed the queen accidentally, how long is it before you'll have a laying queen in there? Anybody have a guess?
Well, 26 days.
That's a good number. That's a good guess. Plus or minus a few days. You never know. But yeah, that's a good guess.
There were 3 answers there.
What's that?
3 weeks, 4 weeks, and 5 weeks, I heard. Which one?
Okay, well let's just count it off. So the queen dies today. What are they gonna do? They're gonna take a larva that just hatched and start making it into a queen. And if you know your bee math, that means that 12 days from now, it's already 4 days old because it took 3.5 days till it hatched. Now it's like a half a day old, and now 12 days from now it's going to emerge. So 12 days from now I'll have a virgin queen, but I won't have a laying queen. Then it's going to be, now is where it gets fuzzy. The 16 days is fairly predictable if the weather isn't really hot or really cold. If it's really hot, she could emerge a day early. I've even seen them emerge 2 days early on very rare occasions when it's in the hundreds. But typically, it's going to be 12 days later I got a virgin queen, plus or minus a day. So now I've got a virgin queen. It's going to be 3 or 4 days for her to harden, probably. That means she comes out, sometimes a queen that later on ends up black looks almost white. She's gray, more grayish color maybe, or she may be kind of a really light yellow, depending on what color she's going to end up. And she may be a lot darker in 3 or 4 days. It's like a lot of pigment gets in her chitin in that amount of time. And then she's, so she's hardening. So she's running around the hive, she's eating stuff, and kind of finishing maturing before she even flies out at all. Then she's going to have 3 or 4 days where she flies out and gets oriented. She may fly as far as 6 or 7 miles to get mated. She'll probably only fly a couple of miles, but she might fly 6 or 7 miles, and she has to get oriented well enough that no matter what she does, how far she flies out there, she can find her way back. So she flies out and starts learning the lay of the land. At first she does like the orienting young workers do, just does the little circle around the hive and kind of figure out, well, okay, here's the hive in relationship to that tree right there and these other hives over here, and go back in, and then maybe she'll come back out and make another flight and go out in bigger circles, and now she kind of gets the lay for a quarter mile in every direction, and then another day she might fly out and get a little further out. Eventually she decides it's time to go mate, and she goes and finds the DCA, which is a drone congregation area. She's got to go find a drone congregation area where all the drones are hanging out so she can mate, hopefully with 20 drones, maybe 40 drones. I've heard numbers thrown around. I'm guessing, it seems to me I saw a paper that they actually documented that this queen mated with 43 drones. But I think that's probably on the high end. 3 or 4 is probably on the low end, but probably typically they're mating with about 20 drones. So they've got to find a good supply of drones. And then she flies out and mates. She might even fly out again tomorrow and mate again. Odds are she only does that once or twice, where she actually gets out to the DCA and actually mates. Once she's done mating, she goes back to the colony, and in about 48 hours she starts laying eggs. So let's count it off again. We started out with a 4-day-old, so 12 days later I had a virgin queen. We had 3 or 4 days to get oriented. Let's say 4, that's 16 days, right? So then we've got another, well, for her to harden, and then we got another 4 or 5 days for her to get oriented. So now we're up to what, 20? And now she flies out to mate, and she might fly out in 2 or 3 days. So that's 22, 23, 24 maybe. And now it's 48 hours later before she's laying, and now we're up to 26. Right?
Last year I was raised lifting reserve queens. Last year I made, maybe it was 2 years ago, about 20 ducks, all the same age. I usually go back a month later to check to make sure they're laying. Well, this time, almost none of them were laying. And the few that I saw were laying they looked like terrible patterns. I almost thought they were drone layers at first. And so I waited another maybe 2 weeks to go back, and then they were all laying. So it took them over 4 weeks to start laying from the time,
or to start laying well.
Or
you said there was some brood there, but
and some of them still had nothing.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's very dependent on
Yes.
the
It depends a lot on the weather when they're flying out to mate. They can take 21 days from when they emerge to when they get mated and still make a decent queen. So if she emerged on day 12 and it's 21, now we're up to 33 days that it could take. So it's plus or minus quite a bit.
Yeah.
I've seen some that just emerged and they were laying like 2 days later, which is just crazy. I don't see that very often,
Yeah.
but I've seen some because I'm raising queens and I know when I put that cell in there and I know when it was supposed to emerge, and you know, so I kind of know. Of course, sometimes you wonder, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this queen came from someplace else. But I'm doing this once a week, so it's not like I'm going to be off by a day because this one's a day off and this one went in the wrong hive, and you know, I'm going to be off by a whole week, not a day. So I've seen some that were laying before I thought they should. I would expect them to be. So some of this is just what's a realistic expectation. How early could they be laying? How late they could be laying? At very well. So.
I read a little bit about Russian bees lately, and a lot of people seem to claim that they can take longer to get laying. And I just had a thought that, you know, everything we know about the timeline of bees doing what they do is based on, you know,
pretty much
the bees that people are studying. And so there's probably going to be strain differences and other biological differences we don't understand that could affect this as well.
And another big one is the weather. If the weather's not good enough for the queen to fly, she just doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Sometimes the weather's crappy for a week, and that sets the whole thing back a week for sure. So let's go back to our 26 days. So we had 26 days. If there were some eggs in there when the old queen died, how many of those are still capped larvae?
only the drones.
Not even the drones at 26 days, but if we have one that got done a little early, we might have a few drones that haven't emerged. But if it's 26 days, then they've all emerged. So you go in there, there's not a speck of capped brood. There's not an egg, there's nothing, and you assume you don't have a queen, and you go buy a queen, and you put a new queen in there, and they kill her. So you buy another queen, you put the queen in there, and they kill her. You buy another queen, and you're about to put her in there when you realize you see some eggs in there, and you go, whoa, where did this queen come from? They were hopelessly queenless. I was just sure they were. Well, you just didn't understand the timeline, you know. So I'm going to skip through some of this because that's what I said. Oh, well, the other thing is, I don't know how many times in October I have somebody say, oh, I've got to get a queen. I've got to get a queen right now. And I'm like, well, why? Because I have no brood and no eggs. Where do you live? Well, I'm in Minnesota. And why are you surprised that there's no brood and no eggs? It's October. It shouldn't be surprising. Now, not all of them shut down in October. I think the other thing that throws off a newbie is that the bees don't all make the same decision at the same time. You've got 5 colonies, and this one doesn't have any brood in it, the rest of them do, so you assume this one should. But this one decided to shut down. And you know, they don't all make the same decisions. It's the same in the middle of summer in the dearth. If you got a little more of the frugal bees genetics and these over here, they may shut down in the middle of a dearth. If you got more Italians, they don't shut down at all. They just keep right on raising brood. They don't, and that's because they selected them to do that. If you're a package bee operator, you don't care if there's a dearth or not. You're going to feed them, and you want them to raise more bees so you can make more packages. Doesn't matter what's going. You know, I want to. Anytime I feed them, I want them to raise brood so I can get more bees to fill my packages, right? So, so these are the reasons why they may not have any brood in there, but there may still be a queen. Yeah, one of them is they may have swarmed and the new queen just isn't laying, or she may have died, or maybe a dearth, or maybe October. And that's what I said not to do. So what can you do? I suppose some of this is the American mindset that you just buy things, you know, and that's the solution to your problem. So you think you're queenless, so you buy a queen, and that seems to be the way they sell solutions. But all the European beekeepers I talk to think much more in terms of these are the resources I have, and I'm gonna. They don't tend to buy queens unless they're trying to change their genetics, and they don't buy packages at all. There doesn't even seem to be a package industry. So this is what they would do without even thinking about it. But it doesn't seem to be popularized in American beekeeping. But if you give them a frame of eggs and brood, you're going to solve this problem one way or another. Either they do already have a queen, in which case this isn't going to hurt them any. It'll just fill in the gaps. So they've got some younger bees coming up. But if they are queenless, they can raise a queen. And even if you want to give them a queen if they're queenless, you'll find out if they're queenless because they'll start queen cells and now you know they're queenless. And you can decide what you want to do next. I generally say though, I'd rather let them raise a queen than buy a queen from some other area. I'd rather have local queens. And to me, it's worth it if it takes me a little longer to let them raise a queen to get local queens than it is to buy a queen from somewhere else, because I think I'm going to save them all this time. Besides, you're not going to save them as much time as you think you are. You're thinking, well, if I put a laying queen in there right now, then I've solved the problem. Yeah, but if you had one right now, which you don't, it would take them 4 days to release her, assuming you're doing a typical candy release. And then she may or may not start laying right away. I've seen some that took 2 weeks to start laying, and I've seen some that started laying right away. So it could be by the time you find somebody who can ship you one, by the time their next shipment date is sometime next week, and by the time you actually get her, and then by the time you introduce her, and then by the time she gets released, and then it might be as much as 2 weeks after that before she starts laying, they might have been able to already raise a queen. It may not be that much difference. Probably it would be a little bit quicker to have a laying queen again if you bought a laying queen, but it wouldn't be as much faster as you think when you add all the rest of that in. So a frame of eggs and brood will fix the problem and it'll answer the question. This is another typical one that people freak out about. If it's all drone brood, then you've got a problem. Okay? So let's just talk about all drone brood first. You go in there and all the brood you can find has all got dome caps. Probably the best description of it is it looks like Kix cereal because it's almost round. Now occasionally you'll see some worker cells that are slightly, in fact almost all worker cells are slightly convex. Once in a while they get a little more convex just because maybe this comb was a little bit short or something inside shortened the cell, and so they needed to make this one a little longer, and so they'll come out a little more before they put their cap on it, and it may look to you like it's a drone, but actually it's just a little bit more convex. But anyway, drone brood is very, very hemispherical. It's like a dome. If you see nothing but dome caps, then you got a problem. You've either got a drone laying queen or you've got laying workers. Odds are if you see a lot of solid patches of drone caps and they look like they're smaller cells, not drone cells, which are usually a lot bigger cells, then you've probably got a laying queen, a drone laying queen. Because the workers don't tend to lay nice, even patches like that. The laying workers are kind of another ballgame. We'll talk more about them in a minute too, but you have a problem if you have that, and we'll talk about the possible solutions. So let's assume you have a drone laying queen. Now, as a newbie, you may or may not be able to find this queen, but that would be your best bet. That's the most surefire solution, is to find this queen, get rid of her, and then give them a frame of open brood so they can raise a new queen. If you don't get rid of her and you give them some open brood, they might start a queen right away. If you give them open brood again next week, they'll probably start a queen. But now we've wasted 2 weeks. I would rather get them going sooner than that. But if I kill the queen, then for sure when I give them a frame of open brood, they will start a queen immediately. And that might buy me an extra week or two in the timeline. And the timeline is kind of important. If you lose a week of them having a queen and raising brood, it's got a big impact on the colony in the long run. So that would be my preferable thing. I would look for the queen and try to find her and get rid of her. If I can't find her, then I just go ahead and give them the open brood and every week until I get the problem resolved. But I would try to find her. So I guess we'll go back to how do you know if you don't see her, how do you know it's a drone laying queen? Well, I said you tend to have a better pattern of eggs. You also don't tend to see a lot of multiple eggs. With a drone laying queen, you might see a couple of doubles here and there, but you're not going to see like dozens of eggs in one cell like you do sometimes with laying workers. So let's talk about laying workers. Everybody thinks that the cause of laying workers is queens, it seems like, but that's actually not the direct cause, it's an indirect cause. Because it's queenless, it ends up broodless, and because it's broodless, it ends up with laying workers. Now, you may think that that difference is not significant, but it is significant because of the solution I'm going to offer you. Because if you give them brood, it's the lack of brood pheromone. If you give them brood pheromone, it actually will set those laying workers back and cause them to revert back to being workers and not laying workers. So if you give them open brood every week for 3 weeks, you can set them back to normal and get them to raise their own queen. Now, I'm going to talk a little about the sequence of events because probably some of you are going to see some of this happen. Maybe I should sidetrack a little on biology. I never know where everybody's at. Okay, let's talk a little about bee biology. What causes a male to be a male and a female to be a female? A drone becomes a drone because anytime the sex alleles match on both sides, it would become a male because that's the sex determination gene. The sex determination is if these match, it's a male. If they don't match, it's a female. But bees don't like haploid drones, so they just kill all those anyway. So if this second set of genes is not there at all, there's no allele over here, it acts the same as if it matched. So basically, if it's haploid, which means it only has one set of genes, then it automatically becomes a drone because that allele is missing. It didn't match up to this other allele, so it becomes a drone. So what happens with laying workers is they've never been bred, so of course they're laying haploid eggs because they've never been mated. They have no sperm, and you're getting, and so you're getting drones. Now, there is a very rare thing which is much less rare in these bees, and there's a whole research project on it, that sometimes a worker can lay a clone of itself. In other words, it doesn't have sperm to fertilize this egg, but it lays a full double set of genes and actually makes a fertile egg that could be made into a queen. If you're counting on that for the solution to your laying worker problem, you're going to be very disappointed. I'm just mentioning it because it's liable to come up. But so the solution is, if I can set them back to where they're not, they're not laying workers anymore, then they'll raise a queen for me. So let's go back to this for a minute. Okay, so there's a sequence of events that happens when this is happening. You almost shouldn't act like this is a single kind of a state, that they have laying workers or they don't have laying workers. What happens is every hive, even a queen right hive, has some laying workers in it. According to a study, I don't have it, I'll probably have it up here in a minute here, but Seeley quotes it in Wisdom of Hive, that they basically took, like, I don't remember, 10,000 or 100,000 bees, dissected them all, looked for laying workers in queen right hives, and they found a certain percent of them were actually laying workers in a queen right hive. So there's always laying workers in any hive. There's just not very many, and the egg police usually keep up with them. So and besides, they kind of prefer, a laying worker prefers to lay in a drone cell anyway, so I don't even know if the egg police remove them. But if they lay it in a worker cell, the egg police come along and go, oh, that's a drone egg, that doesn't belong here, and they take it out.
It's interesting that workers remove those eggs, but an egg that was supposed to be fertilized but wasn't, they won't remove. In other words, a drone-laying queen will develop
I think they usually try to remove those too. I just don't think they keep up.
They can't keep up.
A queen can lay 3,000 eggs a day, and they just... She doesn't usually, unless she's at her peak, but she can lay that many eggs, so I think they just can't keep up. That's my guess. But what happens in this case is, at first, what you'll see when they're starting to develop some more laying workers than normal, you'll see some very misleading symptoms if you're thinking in black and white, because you go in here and you see an egg here, and an egg here, and an egg here on this frame, and you'll see one capped, drone capped, brood cell here, and one larva over here, and it's just all scattered around, and maybe a couple of queen cells with larvae in them. And you think, well, they must have ended up queenless, but it's okay because they're raising a new queen. No, if they were raising a new queen and this was an emergency, there'd be a nice solid patch of brood with a queen cell in the middle of it. This is not that. This is an occasional egg here and there, and an occasional larva, not very many, and a couple of drone capped cells. That's not a normal situation at all for an emergency queen cell. An emergency queen cell, they would have had brood in there when they started that cell, and that would not have all emerged before that one emerged, because the queen emerges in 12 days from when they started that, and some of the eggs that were still there haven't even gotten, you know, they've just gotten capped at 12 days. So that's a pretty good indication you're going down this laying worker road. Now the good thing about catching it at that point is you could put in a frame of open brood and they'll raise a queen right now because they're already trying to raise a queen right now. They just aren't succeeding because those are going to be drones and they're not going to work. So you give them a frame of brood at that point, you could even introduce a queen at that point and probably have pretty good success. You could certainly put a queen cell in there and solve the problem. All those are options at that point. Now, your options will decrease as we proceed. So now it goes a little further and you start seeing a few more drone caps, and they've torn down the queen cells now because they've given up on that. And now you're starting to see maybe a few double eggs here and there, but mostly you're not seeing that many eggs yet. And then you go a little further and now you're starting to see 4 or 5 eggs in cells here and there, and especially on the pollen, they'll lay like a dozen eggs on the pollen. They just love the pollen because they can reach the bottom, and they want to reach the bottom. And there'll be more in the drone cells too because they can reach the bottom because the cell's big enough they can crawl down into it more. Where the worker cell, they can't get their butt far enough in the bottom to lay it on the bottom, and so they tend to end up laying it on the side, and that's not what their instincts are. Their instincts are they want to lay it on the bottom, and they can't reach the bottom. So that's why they like the drone cells better, and that's why they like the pollen better. So now I'm starting to see dozens. Well, what has happened over this time is more and more laying workers are developing, and the egg police can't keep up. So there's one study out there that says basically when this really gets far down the line, half these bees are laying workers. Half these workers are now laying workers by the time you've really reached the end of the road here. So again, now I can solve it by giving them open brood, but it's going to take about 3 weeks of open brood to solve it. 1 week of open brood isn't going to do it. That's just going to start setting them back. I'm going to need another week to set them back some more, and another week before they're actually ready to raise a queen.
Is it just, Michael, is that just one frame of brood, or a couple, or 3?
One frame will do. Doesn't matter. Anything you're going to do with a laying worker colony will go better and be more likely to succeed if you put some open worker brood in there. You know, they've got a little bit of brood in there, but it's all drone and it doesn't seem to do the trick. So, talk about all that. This is generally considered one of the clues that it's a laying worker as opposed to drone laying queen. But I don't think this is 100%. Let's talk about drone laying queens again for just a minute. If a queen runs out of sperm and becomes a drone laying queen, her butt still fits all the way down the cell. She still lays them right on the bottom like she always did. And I think that's the times you find them all nice and neat and just the way you're not used to seeing. If there's too much of a delay in them getting mated, and then they finally do get mated, they get kind of a deformed abdomen, and sometimes they can't reach the bottom. And so sometimes you have a drone laying queen who can't reach the bottom, and she'll be laying them on the side. So I wouldn't consider that a 100% rule, but generally the laying workers will lay them on the side. Let's see. Yeah, there's some people who think, you know, you see a double egg, you must have laying workers. Well, the fact is, a queen had just started laying off and lay some double eggs. If you watch this happen, you've got this queenless colony, and they're raising a new queen. They'll often fill the brood nest full of nectar, and then about the time this virgin emerges, they'll clear out a little space like this on one of the frames, and maybe on 2 of the frames, maybe opposite each other. You know, on this frame and this frame facing each other, they'll clear out this little space. And then the queen comes back and starts laying. She'll just lay that up so fast, she runs out of any place to lay, and she'll lay some double eggs in there. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have a laying worker. She just ran out of space. Or she just hasn't got the hang of it. A lot of times a new queen doesn't seem to have the hang of it yet. She's just like trying to figure this out, you know, how to get in a good pattern and get a good rhythm going of what she's doing. So just a few double eggs, I don't freak out about it. There's 4 or 5 eggs in there, you probably have laying workers. So let's talk about solutions. I think there's only probably 3 that are worth talking about. So I'll just do them. The first one is the one I've already said, which is a frame of open brood and eggs every week for 3 weeks. The second one is just forget it. Shake them all out on the ground. Call it good. Give all that equipment to another colony. Make a split somewhere else to make up your losses and move on. Because that's easy. It's done. You don't have to go back every week for 3 weeks. The third one is give them a queen cell. You give them a queen cell real often, it'll work. It's not 100%, but introducing a queen does never seem to work. So sometimes you can just combine a small queen right one with a small laying worker one, and sometimes that works out fine. I'm scared to do that on a big colony because I don't want to doom this big colony if those laying workers go after the queen right off. But if you shake them out on the ground, they always have to kind of beg their way in, and then there's usually no fighting or anything going on. D. You had your hand up.
I know, I'm listening and.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I didn't get an argument going.
So those are the ones I think are worth doing. I tried a lot of other ones, and some of them I've gotten to work, but I just think they're more work than they're worth, and I don't see that they have any great advantage over the 3 I just listed. Yeah.
Okay, you're saying you're seeing multiple eggs, and you're saying it's laying worker. The Teen Strong hives have been overfilled with honey, and the pollen, no place for the queen to lay, and it forces her to lay and repeat laying 2, 3, 4, 5
Correct.
times, and you put it in frames and then withdraw it. You can go back in 2 days and everything is proper again.
Correct. Yeah. And that's kind of what I said. Yeah. I already talked about that. Let's get to that. This is what leads people to solutions that don't work. They start thinking in terms of there's only one laying worker. If I could just get rid of her, I'd solve my problem. That's not your problem. Your problem is thousands of laying workers. It's not one laying worker. You had more than one laying worker in there before they started down that road. So, and if you wanted this is Wisdom of the Hives, where the information on pheromones, the brood pheromones being what keeps them from turning to laying workers. This is the research paper I mentioned earlier, where they dissected 10,634 worker bees from 21 colonies and found 7 had moderately developed eggs. Those were queen-right colonies. They went in and dissected all of these workers, and there was, what does that come to? 1%. 1% of them have ovaries developed enough to lay eggs. So 1 in 100 of those workers in there are already laying workers. Let's see. This is the myth you hear most often, is that you shake them out and then put all the equipment back where it was and put a queen in there in a cage and that they'll accept her. Sometimes, but not often enough to be worth doing. It fails more often than it succeeds, and I can't see dooming the queen for that. But I think what's happening is that every one of these laying workers is making a little tiny bit of queen pheromone, and as long as there's 20,000 laying workers in there all making a little tiny bit of queen pheromone, they're convinced they already have a queen, so they won't accept one. We talked a little about robbing, but let's talk a little more about it. The times you're going to have the most trouble with robbing is if you're feeding, and especially if you're feeding anything that's got any kind of scent to it, like honeybee healthy or essential oils. I don't like essential oils because of what it does to the microbes, but my bigger problem before I realized that that was an issue with the microbes was that it would set off robbing really badly. If the bees can't smell the syrup, you have a lot better chance of them not robbing. If they can smell it, they can get into a frenzy. So your best bet with robbing is to try to avoid it. So first of all, don't feed them in a dearth unless you need to. If they're going to starve, by all means feed them in a dearth. But feeding in a dearth is just a real fast way to start robbing. So if you have to feed them in a dearth to keep them from starving, then you need to take steps to prevent robbing before you start feeding. So what would that be? Well, the simple, obvious thing is you reduce all the entrances. Now, the best way to reduce the entrances and prevent robbing is to put screen wire over it. Just staple some screen wire over the whole entrance and then poke a hole in it big enough for 2 bees to pass. the robbers will tend to go by smell, and they'll be going up and down the screen trying to find their way in, and they won't just find where the door is and go in. So that's the best way to reduce your entrance if robbing you think is going to be your main issue. You can make a robbing screen that's even better, but it's more work. You know, the screen wire is pretty simple, but a robbing screen is more work, but probably more effective. Mine is, judging by the pictures I've seen of the one that UC Davis has been recommending, and by the reports from the people who are using it, it's even easier to build than mine is. But we'll get a picture of mine here in a minute. But you can make a robbing screen pretty simply. You just have to take advantage of that fact that the robbers are going by smell, and the smell misleads them. So if they have to ignore the smell and go up and around something, then they tend to never figure it out. And the local bees are not thinking in that terms. The robber's mental process is different than the bee that lives there's mental process. The bee that lives there's mental process to figure out how to get back into their hive is just not the same process. The robber's just focused on smell. Where's the smell? Where's the smell? I'm following the smell. And the one that lives there is just like, I came out of here this morning, and it seems to me it was up over there. And even though I can smell it here, I think it was up over there. And they go back to the memory. This is just an observation, but I used to set up my mating nymphs the day before I'd give them a cell, because I thought it was I thought they'd be better, you know, get better acceptance of the cell. But it seems to me that whenever I set a whole bunch of queenless, weak colonies out there, they're much more likely to get robbed if they're queenless. Now, once they have a cell in there, for some reason that makes a difference. I don't know why, but if I set up a mating and put a cell in it immediately, they're less likely to get robbed than if I don't put a cell in until tomorrow. It just seems like the robbers in a dearth just go down the line going, queen, 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 queen. Nope, they're queenless. Let's kill them. Steal all their stuff.
You think it might be actually the guard bees are more defensive if they have something to defend?
It's very possible that in fact, that has occurred to me, yes. It has occurred to me that it may just be the morale of the colony that they feel like, yes, we're a colony, we got to hold together, or crap, we don't have a queen, what are we going to do?
They're all just worried about that instead of...
It's real possible that that's part of it. But the queenless ones seem to get robbed more. And so I try not to leave them queenless, like, you know, well, let's go back to what we were talking about, introducing a queen or introducing a queen cell. I try not to leave them that way for very long, especially if I think there's a high likelihood of robbing. Because I don't want them queenless at a time when they're likely to get robbed. It just seems to encourage the robbers. Sometimes you just have to figure it's a done deal. They're just too weak. They're not going to be able to do this. You got a couple of choices. You can take a couple of weak colonies and kind of combine them, and probably at the same time, it's a good idea to just move them. It's true that the field bees are going to come back to the wrong place and all that, but at least the robbers can't find them. So. Now, if it's a reasonably, let's talk about signs they're being robbed. I think I've got a little more. I think I have a page on that here somewhere, but you want to make sure they're being robbed, and you also want to consider if this is just another colony testing them and trying to get past their defenses, or if they're actually being robbed. The process of being robbed is a little different. If you see some bees wrestling on the landing board, probably they're being tested at least. But when you see these frantic bees all over the colony trying to get in, they're probably being robbed. Because somebody has not just tried to get in, but they got in, they got some honey, they went back and recruited, and now all these bees are coming back trying to get in. So, you don't want to confuse that though with an orientation flight. So let's talk about how to tell an orientation flight from being robbed. An orientation, some of these it's the kind of thing where once you've seen it and thought about it, you get a sense of it. But if you've ever seen robbers, they're just frantic. They're just like I don't know how else to describe them than frantic. They're just all over the hive trying to find any little nook and cranny, and they're not just like walking around on the hive, they're running around on the hive. They're really frantic. The bees who are orienting, they're not frantic at all. They may be out there hovering, but they're mostly, doing this, looking at the hive, and maybe come around on the side and do this. And they're just doing this little hovering thing. they're not frantic, they're just looking it over.
I've seen the circles too, where they kind of.
Yeah, and then sometimes they'll do a little spiral out from the hive to try and get the lay of the land around them, and then circle back in.
Robbers just go straight in.
Well, sometimes they go, once they get it going well and they know where the entrance is, they'll just go right flying straight in. But sometimes before you get to that point, they'll just be frantic because somebody came back with some honey to recruit them, and they're all looking for a way in, and they'll just be all over it, just running around frantic.
I feel like they seem like they're paranoid, like somebody got shoplifted, like they're like.
I agree, they do. And I think that's part of what happens. You know, everybody says, well, you shake the bees out in the front. Why are these bees letting them in? Well, it's because they're not acting like robbers. Robbers act different. Robbers act like, I'm gonna run in here and I'm gonna steal your honey and I'm gonna get the heck out of here. You know, and the bee is just shook out on the ground is like, can I please come in? I'm homeless. And they're like, yeah, whatever, come on. It's just, they just act totally different, and that causes the bees to respond.
They're physically anxious, or at least they always appear.
Yes, that's kind of what she's saying. They act anxious, yes, they do. They act very anxious. So, you need to learn to tell the difference. The other thing is young bees tend to be fuzzy, and they look to your eye like they're lighter colored because they have hair on them, on their thorax even, where a worker usually has it worn off of their thorax. Robbers tend to rapidly get shiny and do not look fuzzy anymore, partly because they're in there just ripping comb apart and getting honey all over them and getting wax all over them, and partly because the guard bees pull their hair as a defense mechanism, so they often end up looking black because they get all their hair pulled. Even an Italian bee that looks kind of brown ends up black when they get all their hair pulled. So you often end up with these black, greasy looking bees that are robbing the place, and these are just fuzzy, light colored bees that are hovering around the hive that we're talking about here. So, if you're really still in doubt, one way to tell is, and you don't really want to wait till dark, you want to have done something before then. Let's say you close them up with some screen wire, it's the middle of the afternoon, and you hose them down with a little water so they don't overheat because it's summer. And maybe even set up a sprinkler, because the sprinkler will make the robbers go home because it's raining. And now it's dark. I turn the hose off and I take the screen wire off. Maybe I'll just leave the screen wire off. Well, I'll probably take the screen wire off and let whoever's on the outside, now that it's dark, move in because they live here, right? And then I'll put the screen wire back on. Now I come back in the morning. Anybody who's on the outside is probably a robber. And if there's still bees coming back trying to rob it, then I probably want to still, keep it at least really severely reduced. I might want to just put one little hole, big enough for one bee for a while until it's getting under control, and then maybe a hole big enough for two bees. You want to create the passive thermopylae where numbers count for nothing. That's what you want. I didn't get a response this time. I thought somebody would know what the passive thermopylae was. I already talked about stopping them. I already talked about that. Talked about the wet sheet. Well, this is an interesting one. I haven't ever tried, but I think he may be misunderstanding why this works. But basically, if you take the cover off, let's talk about this because it's useful for other beekeeping things as well. If you take the cover off of a hive, what do? They
stick their butts in the air.
They stick their butts in the air and they start nasonoving. And what do all the field bees do?
Come home.
They come home and stay. And they don't fly back out for a while until they think they've resolved whatever the issue is, or they've gotten reorganized, and then they'll start flying again. So if you want to move a hive, let's say you got this hive somewhere and it's the middle of the afternoon, you want to move this hive and you want all the field bees to stay there, just take the lid off. You can speed up the process by pulling out a frame that's covered in bees and knock them all off. And when you knock them off, a whole bunch of them immediately come to the top and stick their butts in the air and start fanning. And now we've got all this nasonoving going on, and all the field bees, as they come back, they just stay. So you wait until, probably 20, 30 minutes. Most of the field bees will be back home. You put the lid on, close it up, move it where you're moving it. Will you lose a few? Not very many, but probably some. But you've got 90% of your field bees back because you did that. Well, he's saying you do this in robbing situations, take all the covers off all the hives, and then everybody's instinct is to stay home. But he's saying it's actually because they think they need to stay home to guard their hive. I don't think so. I think they're staying home just because you open the lid. As soon as you take the lid off, everybody stays home for a little while. And at least gives you a chance to stop that frenzy. Yeah.
It doesn't help when the robbers are coming from someone else's.
You're exactly right. That's the other problem. or if they're coming from the tree down the way or whatever. So it may not work at all. That's why I actually haven't ever done it. I don't trust that it's going to be that foolproof. But
Someone needs to take a video of that. I'd like to see that.
I think if the robbers were from your hive, I think if the robbers are from your apiary, I think it would work. I do. I just don't think it'll work if they're from the neighbor's apiary, because then they're not staying home to guard their hives. So here's a robber screen. I actually bought this from Brushy Mountain, and I converted it to a robber screen, and then a short time later they started selling my design with a little metal clip here so it could double as a screen door or a robber screen. But it used to be it was a screen door, and the purpose was if you were moving bees, the bees had a little more room to ventilate, but they were closed up. That was the idea. I bought it for the purpose, well, I bought them originally because I was going to use them for a moving screen, and I didn't ever really use them much, and so I converted them to robber screens. So I added this little block of wood back behind that screen there and cut this notch right here. So then the bees come in this notch, go across here, and go in this little gap over here. So this is the back side. There's that same gap from the back side, and there's that same gap where they came in the top from the back side. So they come in here, go across the screen, come in here, and come into the hive. Now, UC Davis has one on their website that's much easier to build than mine. It's just 2 sticks and some screen, and it seems to be pretty effective from what everybody says. So you might want to look at that one. I haven't ever gotten around to build one of those ever since I went to Top Entrances. I just haven't had a real big robbing issue to deal with, and so I never bothered to build any for it. This is an interesting one somebody gave me one day, and I thought that was crazy, and then I tried it, and it actually worked. Just take some Vicks Vapor Rub and rub it all the way around the entrance, and it just confuses the hell out of the robbers. They come back and they go, "Where's that honey smell?" I'm sure it was right here. No smell. All I can smell is Vicks. I particularly use this one on my observation hive when he's getting robbed, because it's only got this little tube, and I had no easy way to reduce it, but when I put the Vicks on it, the robbers just gave up. I already talked about combining them. Okay, let's talk about finding, oh yeah, well, we already talked some about finding things else. We talked about emergency. Now, and we talked about why you want to know. So why you want to know what they're for. So if they're emergency cells, what do I want to do? I just want to leave them alone and let them raise a queen. If they're supersedure cells, odds are splitting them is not a real great plan, because they're probably not on their way up, building up rapidly. They're on their way down because the queen's failing. I don't really want to split them and make them weaker. I want to give them a chance to raise a queen. But if they're trying to swarm, I want to split them. So I want to decide, what the situation is. I think some of this comes from some of those old books that I actually love these old books, but some of the advice in them I think is really bad. And this is one of them. They were mostly doing comb honey, so they crowd the bees a lot, and their swarm control method, they had 2 things that were their swarm control method. One of them was to destroy all the queen cells, and the other one was to hire an 8-year-old kid to sit out in the bee yard and read books, and if there was a swarm, come and get them. So, but I don't have that option. I'm not sure I can get an 8-year-old to play video games in the bee yard and come and get me if they swarm, but anyway, the other thing they do is they clip the wings, so then if they did swarm, you could have the 8-year-old kid just go over and set a box on top of them and put a lid on it, and then swarm caught. Done. Because they're just all in a pile on the ground, because the queen can't fly. So, I talked to someone about destroying queen cells. Basically, you have the risk of ending up queenless. So, this is one that always seems to mystify beekeepers. Why do they mess up comb? Well, there's things about how things are that you can try and stack the deck to get straight comb, but sometimes sometimes it's just genetic. I've had bees where pretty much everything was wrong, and they built the comb beautifully no matter what I did wrong. And I've had bees that you do everything right, and no matter what you do, they just want to mess it up. But all in all, if you do everything right, usually they'll do it right. And by right, there's a number of things involved. For instance, if you got foundation in here, and if this is a brood nest, the ideal would be to have these spaced 1.25 inches. But if you're buying frames and you're not going to do anything to narrow them or anything, the main thing you want to do is keep them tight together in the middle. because if you space them wider, then it's this is already too wide for brood comb. This is a 35 millimeter center to center, and that's already 3 millimeters too wide. And if you space them out evenly, now you're another 3 or 4 millimeters too wide. And then the bees may look at that and go, you know what? We hate foundation. We could build a comb right there. There's just enough room. I think we could squeeze one in there. And the next thing you know, you got this comb right in the middle between two combs, and that's not what you wanted at all. Or they go, I hate that plastic. How about we don't really build on the plastic? We'll build it out this way. We'll build these little fins all the way across like this, and then we won't have to do that. Well, the more room you give them in there, the more tempting that fin plan gets. The closer they are, the less tempting it is, because those fins aren't very wide. Well, the wider these fins get, the more tempting it gets. So the first thing to do is, I don't know why the books don't ever talk about this. They just tell you to buy a box and put the frames in there. They don't tell you how to space them, that you should put them all tight in the middle. So people look at it and they go, well, I think I should space them out evenly. And so they space them out evenly, and then you just took a problem that was already wrong because they already made these too wide, and now you made them even wider. So if you want my advice, you take a flame and you cut these all down to 1.25 inches, put an extra frame in here, and you'll have a lot less crooked comb.
That's what I do, it works good.
Right. The other thing you get is a faster buildup in the spring because they can cover more brood. But you get the spacing they want, and you get really even comb, because if you have it spaced at the 1 3/8, then the brood will be here, but they'll be fatter up here where the honey is. Where if it's 1 1/4 inches, it'll all be straight. The brood and the honey will all be in line. The honey won't be fatter than the brood because that's the right spacing. Now, in a honey super, they can build it any width they want. So sometimes it's even harder to get them to build good comb in a honey super. But anyway, that's the first thing I would do, is get it spaced right. The next thing I would do is, whether you're using foundation or you're not using foundation, you kind of want to put a good an empty one between two good drawn combs in a brood nest. Because if these are good straight combs and you put this in the middle between them, then this tends to end up a nice, straight, beautifully drawn comb. Because it's got a guide here and a guide here, and there's just nowhere for them to get off. It's already drawn. And brood is a very distinct width, where honey's not. So the best way to get any combs drawn is in the brood nest. And once they get them drawn pretty well, you can pull them out and put them wherever you want, if you can catch it before the queen gets it all laid full of eggs. And actually, they don't have that much invested in eggs. So even if she laid a few eggs in it, you can move it somewhere else. And so it's the best way to get it drawn is in the brood nest, especially if you're doing foundations. You can get it drawn better in the middle of the brood nest, preferably between two good straight drawn combs. Now, you don't have to do that. I put plenty of bees in just a box full of foundationless frames, and they did perfectly. But once in a while, you'll put them in a box full of foundationless frames, and they'll build something from corner to corner. And when they do that, the thing you got to understand is that bees build parallel combs. So if you're hoping they'll get the hang of it and figure it out, it's not going to happen. They're going to build parallel combs. So if that one's crossways, so are all the rest of them going to be crossways, and you're going to have a total mess. I get that one a lot from people who usually it starts out by hanging the queen in a cage between two frames, and they build the first comb on that, which is already off, and then that causes all of the rest of them to be off, and they don't want to destroy any of the precious comb they built, which I understand, but they don't seem to understand the mess they're going to be dealing with if they don't get it straightened out. So let's try a couple of. So first I'm talking about how to get it drawn straight. So now let's talk about what if you don't. These things don't all come down to foundation or foundationless. I read somewhere in some magazine or by some beekeeper an article on, you want to get nice straight combs drawn. So in the supers you get all this nice drawn comb that you had that you harvested, and it's all nice and straight, and you alternate it with the foundation. So they'll draw them nice and straight, right? So that's what I did. I put all the foundation, empty foundation, in between the drawn, nice, straight comb. And you know what they did? They took all the drawn comb and made it fatter till it almost reached the foundation and never touched the foundation. Because it was easier just to make the comb deeper than it was to draw a whole new comb. So they didn't bother to draw a whole new comb. They just drew it out till this one. This one had comb that stuck all the way over to within 1/4 inch of the face of this one. Well, if you do all these combs within 1/4 inch of the face of this one, you can't remove a single frame. You can't get a frame out without just ripping the whole thing to pieces. So, so in both situations where they build it too fat or they build it crossways, here's how you deal with it. Okay, you ready? I spent a sleepless night solving this one. Because I did that on all my hives, that alternating the drawn one with the foundation, and so I had an entire apiary full of frames I couldn't remove. Yep. So I stayed up all night figuring this out. But if you flip this thing over, which I can't do because they're not properly together very well, but if you flip this thing over, you can lift this. You may have to cut something loose, but you probably won't. But you might have to take a knife and cut along the edges here. But then you can lift this box off. And the fact that every other one of these is fat is not a problem. I just let them off the ends. I can take them off. Now if it's just that they're too fat, then I can just take every other one that wasn't going to fit anymore and I can put all the fat ones back in there if I want, or I can go harvest them, whichever it is I want to do. But let's say they're running crossways here at an angle. Well, now I can get to it, so I can start cutting these combs out one at a time and rubber band them into frames and or use the swarm catching frames, as Dee calls them back there, and put all these in a comb that has them straight again. And once I have some straight comb, I can get more straight comb. Because one bad comb leads to another, one good comb leads to another. They build parallel combs. I need to get the combs in the right direction. So I can cut them off, cut them out now, even if they're running an angle, I can cut each comb out because I can get to it as I go from one end, right? So, we'll flip this back over. Questions about any of that?
I found that I bought a bunch of equipment from a local beekeeper who was getting out of it, and a lot of the frames have that plastic foundation in it that I used in supers, and the bees refuse to build comb on the plastic frames.
Some of it's cell size, some of it's just that they don't like plastic, and some of it's how much wax is on it, and some of it is how dirty it's gotten in the meantime. So let's say you've got some and it's got a little bit of wax on it, and now it's set outside on a gravel road, which is where most of our beehives are, and it keeps getting dust accumulating on this, and then the dust sticks to the wax, and now the bees go in there and they look at that and they go, crap, I'm not messing with that. I gotta clean all that dirt off of it before I can even start. So they go anywhere else. If there's anywhere else they can build comb, they go there and do that. And they might finally build on this when they have no other choice, but then they may decide, because of the dirt and they don't want to mess with it, they'll start building fins this way because they just don't want to mess with it. Or they'll build this comb that comes out like this, and it's a half comb. It has a midrib that's out a 1/4 inch from here, and then it has a cell out here. I wished I could come up with a really catchy name that unambiguously described what that is, but I don't know what to call it. But it's this parallel half comb that comes out from the surface. And they'll do that because they just don't want to mess with the plastic. So they build this little half comb out here, and that's a mess. There's no easy way to fix it.
I call it City of the Future comb.
City of the Future comb.
I was thinking stilt comb.
What's that?
Stilt comb.
Stilt comb. That's not a bad name.
Like, you know, house on stilts.
Yeah, it's kind of like
Well, I cleaned them all pretty well.
I gotta think about that.
What if I were to coat them with a layer of wax?
If you get yourself a barrel, you know, like a 35-gallon barrel, whatever. Dig a pit, build a fire in it. Put that much water in the bottom. Put some beeswax in it. Whatever. Get it where it's at least a little more than half a frame here. And then you can dip it, bang it on the side, dip it, bang it on the side, you know, a wax dipped frame. You didn't have to do a lot of painting, and it splatters terribly when you do this. You want it to all splatter inside the bucket, or inside the barrel. So that's what I plan to do with all my plastic that's gotten dirty over the years because the dirt road. And I'm having that same problem where when I first took it out of the box, they were accepting it really well, but then some of it sat around and now they just don't seem to want to mess with it. So I think I'm going to dip it in wax. Painting it just sounds too tedious. I watched, there's a YouTube video out there of somebody doing this, and it just looks pretty slick and easy, yeah.
I have the plastic frames as well, and there's plenty of bee space in the box, but they're actually eating out the bottom corners of the plastic frame foundations.
Well, they can't chew out the bottoms of the plastic, but they will chew out the corners of the wax. So you must be talking about wax.
Well, they're the right style. They're plastic, but they're covered with wax. But they're eating out the bottom corners of the
Do they have the triangles broken out of the plastic? Because some of them come.
Yeah, I don't see.
I've seen them out. If they did, I didn't break them out.
I've seen bees do that.
Yeah, I don't see how the bees can do that because they can't chew plastic. They can't even chew through the skin of a grape. They can't chew plastic.
Has anybody tried pressure washing those? Like if they get real dirty, if you have a pressure washer, does it work?
I have not. I don't have.
Not really. It doesn't get rid of the wax. It gets rid of everything else, but not the wax. The best way to get rid of the dirty wax of there is I just have a jar of hot water and just put it in the hot water for a while. All the wax comes off.
Well, don't leave it in hot water very long though, because then they go wonky on me. Sometimes that works, yeah. So, what did I talk about? I talked about genetics, I talked about parallel combs. So you understand the concept of giving them too much room, right? They kind of want to build parallel combs this spacing, and you're playing with the spacing, then they start getting creative and saying, well, I think I could squeeze one in here. And the more room you give them to do that, the more they'll do it. To tell you the truth, I get no more or less messed up comb doing foundationless than I do doing foundation. It always baffles me the people who do foundation who insist that all your messed up comb is due to foundationless and they never have a problem with that. I've done lots of both, and it's not that simple. The main thing that's different about the foundationless is because they build parallel comb, once they build one wild one, there's nothing to reset them, where if you got foundation, every frame kind of resets the whole game because they move to the next one. Well, now they got to decide to do the same screw up they did on the last one before they'll screw it up, where before the decision's already been made on the foundationless that they went corner to corner, then they're all going to be corner to corner. Yeah.
Could that be maybe because the hive isn't level?
Oh, that can be a problem, but no, that's not why they build corner to corner. I think the bees, if you just take a box and put a lid on it and you let the bees do what they want, they build them all corner to corner. That's what they do with no frames in there. Just put a piece of plywood on top, let them build what they want, it'll go corner to corner. And some of that has to do with where the entrance is too, but if the entrance is right here in the middle on the front, they'll go corner to corner. If the entrance is over here in the corner, they may do something different. The whole warm way and cold way argument, I've played with this a lot, letting bees do what they want, and the bees like their comb to run at a 45-degree angle to the entrance. That's what they like. And I don't know exactly why, but it's probably, if you wanted to reduce it down to the warm way and cold way, I don't know, I should probably explain the warm way and cold way argument. This is a British thing. Since their hives are square, they can put the hive on there either way with the entrance, either at right angles to the frames or parallel to the frames. So the warm way is that the frame is blocking the wind coming in, and the cold way is that there's these aisles and the wind blows right up the aisles. Well, my experience is the bees don't like either one of those. This one they got to go around everything, and this one the wind blows in too much. They seem to want it at a 45-degree angle to the entrance. So that's part of why they do that 45. But they also want to follow they also tend to want to build it on an edge. So this has an edge, they tend to want to follow it. So you got two contrary instincts going here. Now if I put the entrance on the corner and I give them foundationless frame, I kind of give them a chance to express both of those instincts. They're kind of at a right angle to a 45-degree angle to the entrance, because the entrance is here on the corner, and they also can follow the guide. So I kind of gave them both of those things they were shooting for. I think in some ways foundationalists, I have less problems in some ways and more problems in other ways. I have less problems in that they're usually pretty happy to build their own comb. They're not always happy building on plastic, and they'll just do all these wonky things trying to avoid building on the plastic sometimes. And even on the wax, are they making Duragild anymore? I heard they were going to quit making it. They probably got tired of all the insults everybody throws around about it. But I've never actually had any Duragild. I bought a lot of Duracomb, which was the same thing without the little metal strips on the ends. But Duracomb used to be a popular thing. It's basically a sheet of plastic with wax on both sides. It's been pressed, and the bees don't seem to like it much either. So you think, well, it's wax. They should like it. But when bees are making cells, which you can read about in great detail in Huber's book, they're on the bottom. There's this bottom of this cell is part of the bottom of three cells over here. So you got these bees over here and these bees over here, and they're actually working against each other, scraping this bottom down to so thin that once in a while they actually break through, and then they have to rebuild it and scrape it back down again. So they're like right up against each other, making the bottom of this cell just paper thin, literally. I mean, just so now we've got this paper thin bottom that they're trying to make, except they're trying to make it with this sheet of plastic that's in their way while they're trying to do this. And now they scrape it down and they hit the plastic and they go, whoa, that didn't work. What is this? You know, and so it just didn't seem to ever work out very well. This kind of plastic, I think they get to it and they go, I know we can't scrape that down. It's not going to work. They give up a little sooner. They didn't seem to like it much. So I used to get a lot of fins and a lot of stilt comb on the Duragild or the Duracomb. So I think the thing they like the best is their own comb. There's no doubt they prefer to build their own comb. And if you don't believe it, just give them a chance to choose, and that's what they choose every time. Most people should have already figured that out just from the times they forgot to put a frame back in, and come back and see how fast they build a comb right there where you left that frame out. And they're just right on that. I talked about plastic. So I talked about cutting these combs out and rubber banding them into frames. Let's talk a little more about comb. Huber talks about this whole process, and it doesn't agree with what a lot of people are saying now, but it doesn't seem like very many people have really readdressed this. There's a couple of books on both. Well, there's one book on comb and one book on nests in general, including comb. I'm trying to think of the name of the author. They're really expensive books, and it's basically a collection of all the studies that have ever been done on the topic. And it's a pretty good book. But other than that, Huber was the one that actually seemed to get most of the details of actually observing every little detail of how they did this and how it progressed. So the bees are going to build comb, right? So the way they do this naturally is they hang in a festoon. So here's this hanging festoon of bees. And this hanging festoon of bees starts secreting wax on their belly. At least we call it wax. I think Huber would be more comfortable with proto-wax because he took that and tested it against wax and said this is definitely not beeswax. But it is definitely what they make beeswax out of. But it's not beeswax yet. So they take this little flake and they chew it and they add something from their saliva and turn it into, I'll call it young beeswax because it's a putty. It's not really beeswax as we perceive beeswax like you see in a candle or like you see when you buy a sheet of foundation. It's like putty, and they can shape it and they can do things with it. So they start shaping comb and they build this comb. Now the whole object of something like raising comb honey is to get them to build their comb so fast that they have that nice new putty-like wax and they get it all filled and capped before they finish it. And then it just melts in your mouth. That's really the whole object of good comb honey is to get them to do that so fast that they don't finish it. Because what they do if they finish it is they come back and paint it with something that changes it. It makes it a little more yellow colored and it makes it tough. And up until they paint it like that, it's really soft like putty. And after they paint it like that, it gets tough. It's a lot stronger. It changes its qualities tremendously. And he says they secrete that from their mouth and they paint it on there. And he doesn't know what it is exactly, but it changes it entirely. So really, we ought to have a separate name for these different substances because they're not exactly the same substance. Until they've gotten it completed, then it becomes this other stuff. In fact, then you might find this interesting. For years before Huber did this, they'd been arguing over whether they mixed propolis with the wax up here at the top. And there were a whole bunch of them that insisted they didn't, naturalists, and there were a whole bunch of naturalists who insisted they did. So what Huber finally proved beyond a shadow of a doubt was that they build it without the propolis in it, and then they come back and tear it down and mix the propolis with it and rebuild it. Probably because the ones, you know, it's an assembly line. The ones who are building this comb are just making wax with comb, wax with comb. The propolis workers are a different bunch of workers. It's a different crew. The propolis gatherers are a different crew, and the propolis workers are a different crew from the wax workers who are building this comb. So the wax worker crew just builds it all out of wax. The propolis worker crew takes the propolis, comes in here, tears it down, mixes it with propolis, and rebuilds it. So it's a pretty complex thing. Well, let's go back to their building comb. So we got this festoon, and this one bee comes up, sticks a little piece on, and wanders off, and goes and receives some more nectar from a field bee, and comes back up here and starts hanging in festoons again. Another bee takes a little bit and sticks it up there and wanders off and receives some more nectar and comes back and starts hanging in festoons. And then this other bee goes up and starts shaping it and adds his piece or her piece and starts shaping it, and it starts to take some form. Well, none of these aren't the same bees. You know, it's a different bee every time. And somehow they've got to work together to make this work. Well, they're communicating back and forth from this side to this side. All this communications go on at the edge of this as they build it. And this bee and this bee on the bottom are communicating back and forth. Now you stick a wall of foundation in here, you've just changed the whole system. There's none of that communication taking place anymore. There's a wall that's in the way. So I don't know how bees view foundation. I think they probably view it as damaged comb. It's like, oh, we obviously used to have some comb here and it's all messed up. I think we're gonna have to fix it. So they view it more as fixing comb than building comb, because building comb is a whole different process. While we're talking about propolis workers and propolis gatherers and propolis in general, you know, there's a lot of research now that propolis adds to the health of the hive. It's what keeps them healthy. It is an antimicrobial that helps them manage the microbes in the colony. But how many of you have ever looked in a colony and here's this wooden frame and there's these blobs of propolis on here? Yeah, well, see, that is the depot for the propolis. Propolis gatherers come in and put it on the depot. And then the propolis workers, when they're building this comb, let's go back to this comb, they're building this comb, and they've got this cell built now, and the propolis workers, not the wax workers, are finishing this. So the propolis workers get a piece of propolis, and they string it out into a thread, and they cut it off, and they go in here, and they put it in every vertice of the inside of this cell. They put it in the corner, and they pack it in to reinforce the corners of all those cells. And then they kind of paint it all around just to kind of get a general coating of propolis on the whole thing for the antimicrobial properties. And they come back up here to get this, and the beekeeper just scraped it off, and they go, what the hell? Where's all the propolis? So don't scrape that off. That's there for a reason. They're working, and you're interfering with their work.
It's okay to clean the wax off.
You can scrape whatever you want off. I'm just saying they put that propolis there because it's a propolis depot for the propolis workers. I just leave it. My philosophy of scraping things off is if it's in your way, then scrape it off, and if it's not, leave it alone. You know, that's my philosophy. Because if it's really causing you an issue, well, then get it out of your way. But otherwise, I'd leave it there, because the bees are just going to rebuild whatever it is, and you're just making more work for them.
I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I see beekeepers, they open a hive, and they just pop out their frames like it's no big deal. When I open a hive, it's a chore to get the frames out because there's so much propolis.
But you've got good, healthy bees, see?
Okay, all right.
Plus.
I mean, it's really
a lot of it's just how new everything is.
How often you go in as well. Like if it's been a month, it's going to be hard. And you go, maybe when they made the video, they did all that already the day before to get ready to pop it out.
I'm surprised how many videos I see where everything is brand new. The frames are brand new, the comb is brand new, all the comb is white. You know, the frames are all white, they don't have any propolis on them.
Because newbies are really excited and they want to make YouTube videos.
I think you're right, yes.
Do you get paid for YouTube videos?
No.
Because some people, they get paid when they have a YouTube channel and they produce a certain...
I don't have any YouTube videos.
Yeah.
There's YouTube videos of me out there, but they're not my videos, so I don't have any, so... What was that? Something sure went bang out there. Let's see. I just talked about how to rubber band them into frames. Let's talk a little more about that. So you're going to rubber band it into a frame. You got a bad comb. Part of the reason I got sidetracked on that was I wanted to talk about new comb. Sometimes you've got a comb that's wrong and you're trying to figure out what to do with it. And it's this new white wax that I was talking about, this like putty. And in fact, if it was in a frame on a hot day, sometimes you pick it up like this and it just shimmers like jello. Because it's so soft and it's so heavy from all that nectar. There's no point trying to salvage anything there. If it's in the frame, leave it there. If it's all wonky, just cut it out and throw it in a bucket somewhere and let the bees clean it up or whatever you want to do with it. But if it's capped, just cut it for comb honey and harvest it. But if it's not capped, then probably just throw it in a bucket and let the bees clean it up.
So what about the rubber bands?
You rubber band into the brood comb. If it's a brood comb, I would cut it to fit. It may already fit. If it was like a wonky one like this, it's probably the right height this way, but it might be too long this way or whatever. But I want to lay that comb in here and put a rubber band on and a rubber band on and maybe another one in the middle. And then when you pick it up, the rubber bands hold it in the frame.
Now, do you ever put the wires through?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm doing foundationless and
I've done it with wires. It's a real big pain. Okay. I'm absolutely switching to rubber.
Yeah, I don't use wires anymore.
Part of the reason I don't wire them is they're in my way. Let's say the hive's trying to swarm and I've got a bunch of nice cells in here and I want to cut these cells out. Well, it seems like the wire's always running through one of my cells. Or if it's in my super and it's nice new white comb and I want to cut it up for comb honey and it's got these wires in it, it's just not what I want. So
I'm not talking about wires.
I've seen where they've used for foundationless, they've used a string and left it hanging in a loop on the foundationless frame.
Interesting.
So that the bees would follow the lay of the string.
Well, they're gonna follow it anyway because the string's going to be in line with gravity, and the bees are always in line with gravity. So, yeah.
I have a few cutout frames, and what I did is I put wires along one side, and the other side has little nail heads that I can put rubber bands between. So I do a little zigzag of rubber bands, and bees chew through the rubber bands in a week after it's put in. Move it on up through the hive, it ultimately becomes a honey frame. All that gets cut out and goes back to being a cutout frame.
That would work, yeah.
There's this, I don't remember his name, but this beekeeper on YouTube, he was doing cutout, and he was using mediums, probably, but he would just cut the combs a little taller or deeper than the frame, and then just kind of make sure they wedged in there. That's all he did. He said he worked great.
See, a lot of these things depend on how tough that comb is. If it's old brood comb, it can be pretty tough.
Yeah.
And if it's
comb honey, you should just eat it.
Not very, yeah. And if you're doing a cutout, we can sidetrack for a minute on a cutout because we're talking about somewhat here. But if you're doing a cutout, here's the things I would keep in mind. I don't try to save the honey. If it's a really old brood comb, I might, because it's tough enough, maybe it'll work. But for the most part, I just scrap the honey. It's not worth it. I wouldn't do a cutout if there wasn't a flow going on because I don't want them to starve to death, but I'm not really, it just makes a mess. You end up with sticky bees and you're sticky and everything just gets messy. Yes.
I think you should change scrap to eat so you don't confuse people, like you're throwing it away or something.
You're certainly welcome to eat them. I probably end up just scrapping it, but if it's small. If it's big, I might try to harvest it. But
well, I'm just saying,
sure,
it's not garbage.
Sure. So you're doing a cutout. The object isn't to get every last scrap of honey or even every last comb, because if you try to get every last comb, you often end up, you don't have enough bees to cover the comb, and then they get taken over by the small hive beetles, and then they end up collapsing. So you probably want to take about half the brood, not all the brood. You want to make sure there's at least some open brood so they can raise a new queen in case you didn't get the queen, or in case that they decide they don't want that queen or whatever. They've got options. And so I'd probably take about half the brood and none of the honey, and then all the bees I can get so they can cover that brood. Now, if it's a new swarm that just moved into a little box or something, there's a good chance that there's more bees than comb. You can take it all. except maybe the honey, depending on how messy it is and how new the soft the comb is. But you know, everything in beekeeping, you kind of got to play by ear. What am I working with? But I'm just warning you, one of the pitfalls of doing a cutout like on a house is that you end up with not enough bees to cover the comb, and then it gets taken over by wax moths, and then you just kind of wasted your whole effort. One of the important things to keep a colony healthy is that they can cover all the comb they've got. They can guard it from the wax moths. They can guard it from the small hive beetles. If you ever go on a colony and you're having issues with either one of those things, then you don't have a high enough density of bees to the amount of comb you've got. You need a higher density of bees in order to guard that comb. So if you've got some wax moths running around in here, then it's probably time to take all the ones with wax moth in them, go freeze them, take all the ones that aren't occupied and get them out of there. Take all the rest of them and compress them down to where the bees are covering all the combs. And then they'll probably pull out of that just fine. Depending on what put them in this position of being weak. If the reason they're weak is they don't have a queen, then none of that's going to help them a whole lot. But if they're just weak because you did a split, or it was a small swarm, and they just somehow ended up with too much comb and they can't guard it all, then you can usually compress them down and resolve it. Okay, this is the one we talked about a little earlier a couple of times, is bearding. If you've got all these bees on the outside of your hive, that means you got a nice strong hive. That's what that means. Now, if there's tons of them at a time when it's not that warm out, you might want to take a look inside and see what's going on. Maybe they're crowded. Maybe they're not. If it's a strong hive, quite often you'll see a lot of bees on the outside. I think they're taking a break.
It's raining. I've seen mine beard before. Sometimes
I've seen it too. Yeah. I might go in and take a look at it, just see what's going on. But yes.
We have about 5 more minutes, then we need a 15-minute break, and then the next speaker starts.
Okay. So if you want to do anything about that, you might want to take a look, just make sure they're not too crowded, and they're not going to try to swarm. I keep changing my mind on whether what I think about creating more ventilation to get them to all move inside. I've got the tools now. If I could just get the time to do the experiment, I would like to experiment with what happens when I have these colonies here and they're bearding. I'd like to know what the temperature is when I start, and then I'd like to half of them open it up and give them more ventilation so that they all move inside, and watch what happens to this temperature. Does it spike when I open it up, or does it go down when I open it up? I don't know what happens. I suspect on a really hot day it may be getting hotter because I opened it up and not cooler, because they're air conditioning it, basically they're cooling it. So yes.
Do you are these solid bottom boards or screens?
I've got a little of both. So let's say you have a screen bottom board. That's what I'm saying. You open it up. Have I made it hotter or have I made it cooler? I don't know. I'd like to know the answer.
I usually find that the solid bottom boards, they will beard up more. But just because they're bearding up doesn't mean that it's all hot. Those bees that are bearded up out there in the front, if you get down there and look at them close, they look like they're queens. They're so long. And I call them tankers. You know, they're out there, they're evaporating honey on the front of the hive.
You know, that may be right.
And I can tell that because if I go out there to steal some bees, you know, for stinging people, I'll take a jar and just scoop across the front there and walk away with them and bring them in and sting people, and they're just loaded with nectar. Loaded.
I suspect you may be right. I don't know. I guess I'd like to answer some of these questions, because I suspect that they're not out there because it's hot. I suspect they're out there for some other reason. Either there's...
Well, they can evaporate that honey, that nectar down out there in front of that hive just as easy as they can on the inside.
See, I always wonder though, if I create more ventilation, they all move inside, did I create work for them that they now have to go inside and do, or did I free them up to go in and start working when it was too hot to work before? I don't know. I'd like to know the answer to that question, and I don't think anybody's sufficiently answered it yet. But I suspect what you just said. I don't think it's because it's hot, and I think creating more ventilation to get them to move inside, I don't think I've done them any favors. That's what I think. But I'd like to know if that's true. Okay, so almost all these topics, you can find a page on my website. You can go look it up and read more about robbing, or more about laying workers, or more about whatever. There's pages on all those. Here's my email address. I encode it because since these are all out on the internet, the spam bots are always finding my email address in here, and then I start getting, you know, letters from that Nigerian guy who's got all those billions of dollars he can't give away, or somebody who wants to insult my manhood. I don't know, but anyway, that's my website, and that's my book that's back there. So I think it's time for a break. So we'll be back.